Go. All right, we're
Okay.
recording now. All right. So my name is Joseph Hamilton, and I am here with a UTEP professor. You can go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Jesse Kapenga. I teach political science, government, international, and American. And yeah, that's kind of the basics of it. Yeah, yeah, yes.
Gotcha. It's too easy. So we're just gonna go ahead and jump right into it. So the topic is concerning essentially, the Trump administration and immigration is the specific topic for this assignment. The broad topic for the entire semester is the rise of American fascism. With that being said, I do not believe that Donald Trump himself is the one and only problem. I believe it is a system as a whole, and this is just the latest reincarnation of what it's looking like. Um, so, with that being said, on the topic of immigration, we can start off. Um, a lot of people don't believe that it aligns with American values. A lot of people feel like it's definitely extremely different, especially some of the stuff that he's doing right now. So, in your personal belief, do you believe the current administration's immigration policies are consistent with American constitutional values and liberal democracy?
So that's a good question. So I do think that there's this idea that in the Constitution that the rights belong to everybody, right? This inalienable rights. It's not just American citizens. And so that clash there where we're doing things that are unacceptable to citizens. And if we're doing it to other people and we believe that constitutionally or, morally, we believe they belong to everyone, then definitely is a clash with the values that we put out there. And I know there's arguments about what the founders actually meant, whether who those rights belong to when they said all men are created equal, but our understanding of them now is that that does mean everyone, all women, all men, everything. So yeah, definitely some issues there, especially when you get to family separation or deportation without trial, stuff that is clearly constitutional. We start to see a breakdown in yeah, well, as you put, some inconsistencies with the with values. I think the other problem is when you're talking just democracy in general, is that we're seeing immigration policy imposed by the executive branch without Congress. This grand failure of Congress to deal with it. And so there's issues there where when Congress doesn't act and the presidents are left to act, then that's definitely seems unconstitutional. And I think there's huge issues there where um, I think everyone would say there's a problem with immigration, but it's certainly not the president's job to fix it. And that's what we've seen, not just with Trump, but this. And I think we've talked about this before, this increase in executive power over by administration to administration to administration. In some ways, he's just the cumulative end of this increase in power. And that's problematic for our democracy
Gotcha,
and
gotcha.
constitution.
All right. And then with that being said, there's a really good quote, and I know I'm going to mess it up because I should have written it down, but effectively it went, if I live in a democracy, but my neighbor is living in a dictatorship, then I don't live in a democracy. I live in privilege. And I really was like, wow, that is so fascinating because I think about like the duality of how we live here in America. As citizens, we have certain rights. But then when you look at what's happening to people that are immigrants, it's just like, whoa. And I get it, they're not necessarily citizens, but at what point, are we talking about people essentially being second class citizens and, the problems that that creates? So, like, would it be correct to say that immigrants and citizens in this country live under two different set of rules? And are there any knock-on effects for people who are citizens?
Yeah, it definitely is two sets of rules. I mean, it's clear. And I hadn't heard that quote, but I've heard from the civil rights era, there's all this piece of like, if my neighbors don't live in, yeah, you need to fight for everyone's rights, period, across the board. And the international civil rights movement kind of showed that when Americans fought for rights in South Africa and wanted pushed for boycott. So I think we have this understanding that we have to do that, and I don't know why it's fallen away. Um, it's been, I don't want to say for an American for a long time maybe, but definitely the last 100 years it's something we've pushed against. And American official policy has been that for a while. I
Yeah.
think you can find disagreement with American intervention around the world with trying to push democracy, uh, but that has at least been the idea theoretically, is that we are pushing for other good good governance in good countries that respects people. And now we say we don't care, and I think that's a big step away. But back to the question, I think again it's that question of what are human rights versus what are citizenship rights. And it seems like this administration is very much conflating the two. I think it's easy to argue that there are some different rights. Maybe you can say the right to vote doesn't apply to non-citizens, um, but I think that the worry is that slippery slope of once you start to justify taking away uh, basic human rights from one group of people, then that's the slow step. And this maybe speaks to fascism. This idea of then can you take it away from one other set of people? Is it transgender people or whatever it is, people who are citizens, but you start to strip it away. So this idea of universality, I think, has to be. It's the sometimes it makes me unhappy sometimes, but this idea that it needs to apply to everybody, whether you like them or not,
Yeah.
is important, and that we've lost. I know in you've used the term human rights a lot, and it's like so important because it's universal, and
Yeah.
you can see the pushback against that from people who want extra rights that are different, and I think that's problematic, and I don't know how we go back to teaching those to people and saying this does apply to everybody. It's not about being special. It's that we're all special. um,
Everyone
but
in the
yeah, definitely
community.
that two sets. And I think the worry is besides the pure morality of it, which is a problem. There's the that sorry, it's still a little early in the morning.
Oh, it's
Sort
all
of
good. You're good.
self-interest of saying, well, if this could happen to them, then it could happen to me. And so let's not let it happen to them. And I feel like
Yeah.
that's another part that is, yeah, self-interested, but just as important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's like how people when they talk about capitalism, it's just like, oh well, greed is good. Like that's how I see human rights. Like a
Yeah,
threat
yeah.
to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And it's just like you either buckle down and get with the program, or you're looking back in 20 years and you're like, wait, we used to be able to do that. I'm like, yeah, well, you didn't fight for it, buddy.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's no safety net for you now because you took it away for everybody else. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then with that being said, the overall effectiveness, because a lot of people feel like it's just like they're you got one side that feels like, okay, no, this is exactly what we need to be doing, and the other side that's just like this is exactly wrong. Like it's almost like there's no middle ground, and what kind of loses the effectiveness of the policies, whether you agree or disagree with the policies, like are they actually working? So, do you believe that the current administration's immigration's policies in achieving their stated goals, such as reducing illegal immigration and enhancing national security, do you believe they're actually achieving that?
So I'd have to look at it's hard to, I think we run this off of numbers, and it's sort of like, how do we know it's working? And if it's just to reduce illegal immigration, the last numbers I saw, and you might have to go look at these, it does look like numbers are down, that there's always an ebb and flow. And sometimes it's weather, or it used to be weather related, seasonal,
Yeah,
job related, revolution or dictator related. There's all kinds of the push and pull factors of immigration. And definitely that pull factor, it seems like being nasty and treating people poorly and saying we are not going to give you a chance does reduce it. Because there was my understanding is there was a decrease in numbers,
yeah,
as soon as Trump kind of came in. So if it's just purely on that numbers level, it could be working. Again, it's really early. and it's hard to say 2 years into the term what changes. Um, but it doesn't, this idea of enhancing national security, it doesn't solve any of the push factors, and I think that's the problematic, right? It doesn't solve the lives that people are living, the reason that people are economic refugees or political refugees, and that's the problematic part, this looking at and uh, canceling USAID, and the selfish reasons for a lot of these projects was how do we reduce, uh, these problems in other places.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's definitely. Um, I think we'll see in the long term we could have more problems because of that.
Yeah. And actually not, I'm really glad you mentioned USAID because you knocked it out of the park for me. Because the next question was going to be like in your opinion, does the current administration have a firm grasp, sorry, with the main issue at hand in regards to immigration? And the reason I asked that question was specifically because of USAID. If you're going to cut off the aid that they're getting, you're only incentivizing them to come over. So I feel like what we're doing is we're just like we're creating the wave that we don't want, that we say we're trying to stop. So it's just like, how do they even have a grasp on it, or how do you feel like their understanding of it is in comparison to like what the actual problem is?
Yeah, I mean, definitely not. And most of these solutions seem to, or their response seems to be the kind of quick gut check, sort of, this is particularly something we don't like. But I think there's people in the administration who do understand USAID. I don't know that Marco Rubio, like, sure, he's pretty anti-Cuba or whatever it may be, but this idea of projecting American soft power seems like something he would do. So it does seem like this is maybe a specific. I don't know who Trump's listening to for this, why he's gotten it, but yeah, that I do think the long term consequences are going to be definitely immigration related, as more chaos happens. As we stop supporting some of those issues, and it's across the board the administration. I mean, one is um, they haven't gone to Congress for a solution, which is the basic solution with our issues. And then besides the foreign stuff, my understanding is they're not filling in vacancies for in the judicial system, um, especially in the immigration judicial system. So that's slowing down the process. So another issue where we have deported people constantly, but some of it is just this long wait. And then yeah, foreign policy is I think we could see a huge negative effect, and um, definitely would increase the that push factor. Yeah, so in some ways that's been America's, it's I don't know when it turned into a liberal thing to interfere in the rest of the world, but that's always been our tool. And I
Yeah,
think we sometimes people worry about those small, like that kid with AIDS, that canceling aid is going to affect them.
yeah,
But then the grander issue does seem like it will make things worse, for sure. I think it's always been seen as on a cold economical sense that it's good bang for your buck. And now we've stopped doing that.
yeah. No,
Super
no,
problematic.
absolutely, absolutely. And now that you mentioned that, the next question is, um, so I know a lot of people are upset with the Trump administration and the way that they're doing things because they feel like they're doing it very callously. But when we look at a lot of the numbers, really they're just ramping up things that have already been done under the Obama administration, under the Biden administration. So how do they compare? Because whenever people talk about Obama and Biden, I feel like it's more of like, oh, there's issues with the system. When we talk about Trump, it's just like it's purposeful. So even though they're both kind of doing the same thing, one's doing more of it, how do they compare in policies in terms of immigration?
Yeah. Oh, I think you're so right that
Oh, I think we lost you there for a second.
And then all right, there we go.
Okay.
Because you had asked comparison on policies, and I think you
Yes.
froze up at that point.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I definitely think on the face, it seems way harsher. It seems really more cruel. It's more obviously brutal. Um, but I agree. Everything I hear from I mean, looking at numbers and then talking to immigration activists and um, the facts on the ground, there may not be that much of a difference. I was listening to something now, trying to figure out the effects of mass deportations, and so they went back to Chicago to like the Pilsen area under the Obama administration. It was an economist trying to figure out what happens, but we've seen this before. Biden quietly kept Remain in Mexico in place,
Yeah.
and so I think maybe there are some big things that are the same, and that's not talked about. But I also think small differences can make a big difference, and if it's a couple families kept together, even though the number wise deportations might be the same, you have some more, uh, yeah, well, the effects of a family being kept together
No.
um, certainly measurable to them. And things like using Guantanamo. Well, it's like, well, that's not that many more people being deported. All of a sudden, you're creating this extrajudicial sort of system. So I think there are differences, and they are important differences, but there certainly are. It's easy to ignore that much of it is the same.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to, again, to this issue of we have a system that's not working, and Congress isn't doing it. So each president says, well, there's not much I can do. And apparently Americans care about this. So they, they
Yeah.
do much the same thing. And so it really pushes back on the, what what is the end, the final solution. That's a terrible word. A good solution.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hopefully not. Hopefully
Not
not. Yeah,
yeah.
we're yeah, and now that you mentioned that, the next question is solution based. Obviously, a lot of people feel like they're trying to figure out like what they can do. So what are some things we can do at the local level, especially since we're in El Paso?
Yeah, and that, man, that's a great question. And I think some of the, man, I'm sorry, my camera, I don't know how to use my phone
It's
with the just like leave it on a weird angle there. Um, uh, I think some of it is this idea of integration and helping, immigration is successful when immigrants can integrate into the community and they're welcomed,
yeah,
and just the basics of creating community support systems. And I think you go back to the idea of universal rights and human rights, and if you can help with those support systems that help everyone, if it's a food bank or a shelter that will give to everyone no matter who they are. um, I think just taking care of basic needs is important.
yeah,
um, and when I had written down some other thoughts here. And beyond then basic needs, I think this building community, right? There's this always this, and I mean, honestly, this is for all Americans, but it's this idea of creating social spaces, so people have social support along with, basic needs is fine, but you also need you know the the folks who are there to help you out to succeed, emotionally, like all of those things. I
yeah,
think those are some of the basics. Also, local laws and ordinances, um, can make a big difference. And I know, there's all this talk about sanctuary cities, but take the name away and just take communities that are more welcoming, that focus on less on immigration policies and more on real issues. Um, and I think those small choices can make a huge difference, and it's sort of like the voting for the sheriff that says, this isn't my concern. I want to focus on crime that's,
yeah,
that's more important. And just the simple fact of voting that person in can have huge local effects. So I think all those local things in El Paso, it's, we've talked about, I mean, there's just so much immigration policy and immigration work going on that helping it any of these small organizations, I think, can have an outsized effect. And it's always nice to, you can go out and yell at Congress and vote, and that's important. But then it's those all the local decisions, I think, are you have a much bigger effect.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and pushing for the norms, and I think that's the hard thing. Is like, how do we create? And in El Paso, we have it for the most part, is a community that just doesn't care about immigration status, um, and and I think the more it's like a lot of issues. It's like, how do you create it so that open racism is not acceptable? And it's like once you have a community that does that, you haven't fixed racism, but that's a step. And I think the same with immigration is working towards what the norms of the community are, and saying this is who we are, this is who we accept, this is who we believe, what we believe, and the laws can change, but this is still
Yeah.
who we are. If that does that make sense?
No, no, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. It honestly reminds me of the concept of shining your light. It doesn't necessarily matter the situation around you as long as you stay grounded in who you are and your values and what you believe, and you have a group of people around you that can also do the same. It's just like it can be pitch black. If we all shine our light, then we can all see a way forward. And it's just like that's something that I really feel like we should harp on and focus on. With that being said, my surprise question for you.
All right.
So I had a survey.
Uh-huh.
It was 9 questions, but the thing I found interesting was, man, excuse me, the way I had the survey set up was 1 to 10. And I put in some negative questions in there because I didn't want people to just get in the habit of writing 10 every time or writing one
Mhm.
every time. Um, and it was about Trump's immigration policy. Essentially, the closer you are to the number 10, the more liberal
Mhm.
it was. The closer you are to the number one, the more conservative was. And the crazy thing was, not a single person that I've surveyed so far has averaged a 4, 5, 6, or 7. There is no middle ground. So, with that
Really?
being said about coming together, how
Huh.
do we come together when the middle ground is missing? So, how do we create that bridge?
Oh, that's a great question. So that's wild, but I think I'm not surprised. Especially right now, immigration has
Yeah.
become the thing. Um, I honestly think it's the small conversations, right? It's the, like, in a survey, people can kind of throw out that kind of stuff. But if you put people in a small room, and everyone hears each other out, I think there is often, it's like, oh yeah, you think there's too many immigrants, but you also think kids shouldn't be taken away from their parents, and you start to find this common ground. Or people are like, well, I want people to do it the right way. And then you can sit down and talk about what the right way is, and be like, is it too hard?
Yeah.
Is it too long, or whatever it may be. And I think it's the small conversations. And I mean, you'll hear me harp on this over and over again, but it's just getting off the social media. It's like, and talking. And I think, face to face, because um, we respect each other, and we're politer when we're face to face, and you can kind of meet that middle ground. And I do honestly believe the middle ground is there. I mean, I think it's there. I think it's shared. I think we've just it's really easy to fall to your opposing corner when you think, oh yeah, this is one of those questions, or this is one of those issues. But I do like people in the end, for the most part, want to respect other people.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. And the other thing I've seen locally in El Paso, and this jumps back to the other question as well, is um, you have organizations that are just working to do the right thing, and they've brought in. So I know a neighborhood organization that is just after school, works with kids, gets a lot of its funding and support from a more conservative church. And they have volunteers come in, and you have these sort of anti-immigrant volunteers who will drive their kid to the kid they're sponsoring to the border, and pick them up at the border, when they're going to visit relatives, and just with that single interaction, like, start
Yeah.
to change their mind, be like, well, I haven't changed my mind, but I'm working with Jose, and Jose does not deserve, what's happening to him. And I think that personal
Yeah.
experience has to happen. Like, when you step back and look at the numbers, we can yell, and it just doesn't matter. And you need those And people need to get out there.
Yeah. No,
And I think
absolutely.
that's
Absolutely. I think it takes both, because it's just like how people talk, oh, left wing, right wing. I'm like, listen, they're two wings of the same bird, okay? And if we can't flap together, we're gonna fall. And it's just
yes.
like it's so important that you talk about that because it's just like if we ever had the the emotional values of liberals with the no, we're just going to get it done spirit of Republicans. It's like, man,
Yes.
we would be great because it's just like we sit here, we'll hold our paddles and hear
Yeah,
this
yeah.
guy is just signing executive orders. He's like, let's push it through. And it's just like, wow, hello,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
for
It
sure.
doesn't work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Oh, that's good. Huh. Did you ask students those questions or who did you ask? Or out on the street
I
or?
assume actually, hold on real quick. Let me stop the recording.